isn't it?
It is. I think the light's better in the morning, isn't it?
The
maybe we
light
should.
is, the
Maybe
light
we
is
should think
much
about
more
that in the
flattering.
future.
Yeah, we are now changing the crowd church live stream from 4 p.m. to 9:30 because the light is more flattering.
No,
I
let's
don't
not
think
do
so.
that.
Yeah.
No.
I definitely don't think we should be doing that. But Sal, why are we doing this extraordinary live event on a Monday morning?
Well, yeah, isn't it strange to be here on a Monday morning? But the reason why we're doing it is because yesterday, during our Sunday afternoon live stream, which you can catch every Sunday at 4 p.m, we had a few technical issues, which meant you might have heard quite a lot of echoing, especially after the talk when we were wanting to kind of do a discussion about the talk that I did yesterday. So we thought we'd come back this morning and we'd have that discussion again, so that you can listen to what we were saying without the awful echo in the background.
Absolutely. And I've just been checking the live stream to make sure the echo is gone, and it's gone. Thank you, Jesus.
Oh, yay!
Woohoo! I think we've solved the problem. I do think we've
that's
solved the
good
problem.
news, Matt. Good news.
I'm stoked, Sal. I'm stoked. And so, yeah, sorry about yesterday and the technical issues that we have. But Sal, let's jump straight into this. So you did a talk, right, on betrayal and abandonment, which I thought was a phenomenal talk. And we will suggest, if you've not listened to that, you do go listen to that on the live stream from yesterday, because it was a fantastic talk. And it was without echo, the talk, which is always nice.
Talk was without echoes. That is a good thing.
yeah, absolutely. So do check that out. But for those that maybe did watch it or haven't yet checked it out, let's give a quick recap of the talk. What did you want to cover in that talk?
Okay, so this was a not light topic to be talking about on a Sunday afternoon. This talk was all about betrayal and abandonment, and actually came from the passage in Mark that we're up to, where Judas betrays Jesus with a kiss. So we looked at that passage, and we looked at how Jesus dealt with betrayal and abandonment, and how we can then use that in our own lives, because these are things that affect all of us. You know, I talked about how betrayal is something that runs through the stories that we read, the things that we watch. You know, it's all around us. It's happened to all of us at some point in our lives. So, you know, how do we deal with that? Yeah. So the first kind of part was me going into, you know, if you've been betrayed or abandoned. And I used an example of in my own life where, you know, my dad wasn't around at all when I was growing up, and how difficult that was for me, and how I came to terms with that as I got older. And then I looked at how Jesus dealt with it, and we talked about the issue of forgiveness, which I was really keen didn't kind of come across as a flippant, well, you know, just forgive the person that's betrayed you, because that's just impossible. You know, that's really, really hard to do. So it's about, how do we forgive someone, and why should we forgive someone? How does it actually help us if we forgive? So that was the main sort of first part of the talk. The second part of the talk looked at, what about if you're the person that had done the betrayal? What about if you had abandoned someone? You know, how could you come back from that, in effect? So I definitely recommend watching it, because I can't, you know, tell you the whole thing in a couple of minutes. But that's the kind of background that we're coming from, and we wanted to open the discussion again and talk about these things again today. Is that all right, Matt?
That sounds like a good recap, so I really appreciate that. And actually, Matt's listening to the live stream now. Hey, Matt. Morning. Hope you're doing well, bud.
Morning.
So no, I thought Sal, yesterday your talk was incredible, and I tell you why I thought it was incredible. I thought it was incredible because you took something that was actually quite personal, and you related it to an event that happened to Jesus. And, you know, being betrayed by Judas with a kiss is probably one of the most well-known parts of his story. And we often use the word Judas to refer to betrayal, don't we? Now you were a Judas, meaning you betrayed somebody. And betrayed with a kiss is quite a common phrase. And you took that event and you're like, well, this actually works, or this happens today, and we've all experienced betrayal. And you talked about the story with your dad, and I asked a question yesterday which we never really got into, but how tricky was that for you, talking about your dad like that?
Yeah, you know, it's a difficult topic. It's it is like a wound, I suppose, in my life that I carry, and that's the thing that I wanted to kind of talk about as well, that those consequences of betrayal don't go away, but we can learn to sort of live with them in a positive way. So it was difficult to talk about, but in many ways, I've had kind of many years of trying to kind of get to grips with it and get used to it, and also ask for help from God to help me in the whole process. Yeah. And then we talked as well about how in my life the restoration of that of the sort of abandonment and betrayal from my dad has been sort of redeemed, the whole situation, through the relationship with my husband James, and then his kind of the amazing dad that he's been to my own children. I've got 2 teenage girls, and they haven't had to experience what I had to experience. So that's kind of, I just kind of live with it in that way. But we also talked about forgiveness being that daily decision that you make. It's not a one-time thing. Brilliant, I've done that, tick that box, excellent. It's an ongoing thing, and some days much harder than others.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point. There's a couple of questions I want to ask you off the back of that. One is, it's more of an observation, really. When you talked about it being a wound, and how often we have these wounds, but wounds create scars. And sometimes your wound is healed, but you're still left with the scar of that event, aren't you? You have to deal with that and face the reality of that. But in terms of, you're talking about the redemption coming, God's redemption, and how you've got a marriage, and you've been with James nigh on 30 years. How long have you been married out of those 30 years?
We've been married 23 years this year, but yeah, we're childhood sweethearts. So although that sounds
when you were
like
2, right?
Time, I haven't had plastic surgery. We were young when we got together.
Got together when you were 2. Have you? I guess I'm curious here in the sense of, if your dad left your mum when you were quite young, and you had to grow up with dad. Has that impacted how you perceive James at times? Has that had an impact on your marriage? Do you know what I mean? Is that, or has that been part of the healing from God?
Yeah, I don't think it's impacted my marriage at all. I think that must be part of the healing, because if you look at lots of children that are from parents that are divorced, it kind of pushes them away from marriage and pushes them away from some of those relationships. It can do, not everyone. But that was never actually an effect that it had on me. And I think that must be from, the healing process, and through God's grace, really. I think the one thing that it has sort of done is it's really difficult to kind of see God the Father as that incredible, perfect, amazing Father. In church, we sing lots of songs about God the Father, and hear lots of things about God being our Father. And I think if you've had a difficult experience with your own dad, that's really difficult to not see him through that lens, to see God through that lens. So that is something that has taken me a lot of years to actually unpack and understand.
So what have been some of the key steps in helping you do that?
I think people praying for me has been, really helpful. When I was a teenager, and talking to in the talk about how it was probably at its most difficult when I was a teenager. But I was fortunate enough at the time to be in a. Oh, hello! Is that a text message, Matt?
No, someone at my front door.
Is it Amazon again?
Yeah. I don't buy from Amazon if I can help it. I'm just checking now. Someone's going, sorry, Sal, we interrupted.
Okay, that's all right, no problem. I was saying something really profound.
I know, really deep.
Don't worry, Matt, it's no problem. What was I saying? Oh yeah, about when I was a teenager, that it was probably at its most difficult. But I was fortunate enough to be in a youth group with kind of adults who really sort of loved me through it and helped me through it. But as I said before, it is an ongoing thing, and each time in your life, like for example, when I have my own children, and you realize that love that you feel for your own children, it's really hard to understand how someone can walk away from their children. Yeah. So that kind of hits you again, and so it's a fresh, right, okay, perhaps I need to deal with this in a different way now. So it's ongoing. But the one point I really did want to make about forgiveness is that it really helps you. That forget about the person that you're forgiving. It really does help you. That bitterness, that anger, all of that you carry with you just eats you up, and forgiveness kind of releases you from that. Yeah,
you talked a bit about this yesterday, didn't you? About how forgiveness is not necessarily for the benefit of the other person. You know, your forgiveness is not necessarily for the benefit of your dad. It's for the benefit of you and your marriage and your relationship with your kids, right? And you talked about how Matt's just put here in the comments, I've had plastic surgery, going back to the plastic surgery comments. I've just noticed. Thanks, Matt. Appreciate that.
I think he's just got a really good setup of like these amazing lights behind him and a super duper camera man. I don't think it is actual plastic surgery. If you see him in real life, he looks about 20 years older. Now, this is what I missed yesterday when I was echoing. I can't do this.
You know what? I'm going to go back to creating the echo. Just hang on a second. You're much more polite with that. Yeah. So yesterday we talked about, or you mentioned about how forgiveness frees you or gives you this sort of freedom, and that intrigued me. That was an interesting phrase I thought you used, in terms of what do you mean when you say that forgiveness frees you? You know, that, or God's freedom comes through forgiveness. How does that make sense?
Well, just what I was saying before about the whole, you know, when you've been betrayed, those feelings of anger and bitterness and resentment, you know, they're, for a while you can sort of live with those, but if you carry that with you into your life, it just eats away at you, and actually it's then sort of punishing you even more, or kind of hurting you even more. So when you forgive those people, and that gradually, I'm not saying, you know, it's like an instant thing, oh brilliant, I've forgiven them, oh I feel better now. I'm not saying that, but as you do it, it's a process, and you can let go of those feelings, and actually you will feel lighter, you will feel freer in your own life, to not carry that forward with you into the next relationship or the next, you know, situation like that. That was my point, really. But I'm not for 1 minute saying it's easy at all.
No, it isn't. But it is beneficial.
Yeah.
In fact,
and the point that I was making about, you know, sort of Jesus being betrayed in the worst possible way, that sort of relating it back to that, is that you can go to God because he knows how you feel. He's experienced it, and he wants to be there for you, and he wants to help you through it. And I just find that really helpful.
Yeah, that brings us back to an interesting point around the story, how Judas was betrayed Jesus with a kiss. So here Jesus is in the worst moment of his life up until that point. You know, he's been up all night praying. He's been exceedingly sorrowful, and just wanting, you know, a different way out. Sharon talked about that, and then here he is, you know, his mates couldn't stay awake with him and pray with him. It's just like he comes up and there he is. Judas comes over and gives him a kiss, and Jesus in that moment understands exactly what's going on. I mean, how do you think he felt at that point in time?
Wow, it's devastating, isn't it? I mean, there was that quote that I said about betrayal coming from the people that you love, and to be betrayed in that way, you know, that must have been just awful. I would have thought, you know, he would have felt so alone, so disappointed in those people around him that he'd put all of that love and energy into, to turn around and sort of treat him like that. Yeah, that would have been a very, very low moment, and it would have been just awful. And that's why I think that we can say, you know, whatever we're going through in our lives, Jesus understands that as well. And you can go, and it's not a magic fix, but you can go for comfort, and you can go for peace, and you can go to him to help heal those wounds. Yeah,
that's a really valid point, that I think, he has been through it all. And so he's not, as the Bible says, he's not, it's not like he doesn't know what you're going through. He doesn't know, it's not like he doesn't know what you're feeling, because he's been there, right? And we can trust him with that, and help him. Maybe the other way around. Maybe he help us. Yeah. We solve that, deal with that. Now, the second point that you came, so your talk was, in effect, it was in two parts, right? So you talked about how Jesus was betrayed, and you talked about that in your own life, and how Jesus dealt with that by forgiveness. But then you kind of rounded off the talk by talking about Peter and Judas, and how they were the perpetrators of betrayal, for want of a better expression. But they were the ones that actually did the betraying, and the rejection and the abandonment, they were the ones that kind of created that scenario. And so you looked at it from the eyes, or through the eyes, of someone who has betrayed. And I thought that was a really interesting thing to do. And so I guess, what did you learn from that?
I think it was really interesting to look at the two different, I'd never kind of put it side by side like that before, and kind of thought, Peter and Judas in our cut through the history of the Bible. And when you sort of think back about the kind of the people in the Bible, you think of Peter as, this sort of hero, and Judas as this villain. And it was very interesting to kind of look at it and think, well, actually, hang on a sec, they did the same thing. It did exactly the same thing, and yet we vilify Judas for it, and we forget that actually Peter did that too. But my point was, the difference was the response afterwards.
Yeah.
And we've all done things we regret. We've all done things to a greater or lesser extent that we need to ask forgiveness from people and from God, but from people for as well. And I wanted people to know that there is hope. There is a way back from that. There is redemption. That doesn't have to kind of be it. And that was sort of the point that I was wanting to make in that second half of the talk.
Yeah. No, I thought that was really powerful, actually. Like you say, how they both had betrayed Jesus in some respects, and how their response was quite different. So both, you pulled out that both had regret, because that's what the Bible tells us, that both Judas and Peter regretted it. Judas regretted it to such an extent that tradition says there's conversations about whether Jesus hung himself. Oh, Jesus. Getting all my words mixed up. So Judas, that's the guy.
Put your teeth back in, Mac.
And how did he die? But fundamentally, you could look at the scriptures and go, well, Jesus, starting again, look. Judas. Let's just hit the start again button. This is a problem with going live. That Judas actually was so mournful and so full of regret and guilt that he ended up committing suicide, versus Peter, who had the same regret and remorse, you could argue, but didn't. And the difference between the two was actually Peter acknowledged that actually going to Christ and getting forgiveness was a much better way out.
Yeah.
I just wonder whether Judas thought that he was not able to do that somehow.
Yeah, do you know, I was having a conversation with someone about this recently, and they said something really profound, which really made me think that the difference between guilt and shame. So they both felt guilt, because I think it's right sometimes that we feel guilt, isn't it? Because we can then ask for forgiveness and act out of guilt. So actually guilt is our kind of our conscience, or our way of telling us that
a little signal.
We've done something.
It's a little signal.
Yeah, exactly. But shame is very different. And if you stay in shame, that's when you kind of can't move beyond that to find redemption. And I think Judas, I wish I'd said this in my talk, Judas stayed in shame, and Peter moved beyond shame to guilt to redemption, whereas Judas just stayed in that point of shame and wasn't able to move beyond that. And I think that is something that we can relate to our own lives, that we feel that shame, but we have to move beyond that into asking for forgiveness, into moving forward.
Yeah. That's really powerful. And I think the learning from that is actually, if you do feel that much shame, that actually going to God, does that become complex? Does that become tricky and hard for people? It's easy to say, Jesus will accept you, Jesus will forgive you.
Yeah, if you feel that shame, you don't want to face anyone with it, do you? You want to hide away. But until you can kind of face it head on, you're not going to be able to move on from it. Yeah, not easy.
Yeah, it's not easy. But I think, again, Scripture talks about how, Jesus takes our shame and our guilt. And Scripture talks about in Romans 8, doesn't it, about how we don't need to be ashamed of him or the gospel, or ashamed of what he is doing in our lives. And that actually, if you're in that situation of shame, that God is there and he accepts you and he's not critical. I think that's the important thing about God is, and you see this with Jesus, when he was in the restoration of Peter, he wasn't critical. He just said, "Do you love me?" 3 times. And I mean, it wasn't like, he didn't go to Peter, "You utter moron."
Yeah, I mean? As we would have wanted to. Yeah.
Yeah. "You 24 carat plonker," to quote Del Boy. But it's kind of like, I think the treatment of people by Christ is quite fascinating when they go to him with that openness and that seeking forgiveness. He never leaves us feeling ashamed, and that's a really important lesson. Well, Sal, there were a couple of other questions that we had in the post yesterday. One from Gemma saying that it's not easy to forgive people that are still in your life.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, because if they've let you down or they've hurt you, they've betrayed you, and you have to see them every day or every week, it's a kind of a constant reminder, isn't it, that that has happened. So then that's much harder. But then that's that ongoing process of forgiveness that we talked about, it not just being a one-off, brilliant, done, tick that box, that it's ongoing. Not easy at all.
No, not easy, but it's probably some of the most complex ways of having to deal with forgiveness, in terms of if they're still in your life, or if you still see examples of that. Marriage would be a classic example, or parenting. It's it was interesting how when we did the Mother's Day conversation, Kirsten in her video talked about how she often goes to her kids and asks for forgiveness, which I think is quite an interesting approach to parenting, because I don't see that from parents a lot. Do you know what I mean? I'm parent, I'm dad, or I'm dad. I know best, right? So therefore, get in line. I thought that was great. And the other thing that Matt said is what about people that how should people respond when you ask them for forgiveness? So let's say I undoubtedly have done something very crazy and upset you in some way. So usually happens most weeks.
Most weeks.
Yeah. And I come to you and say, "So I'm really sorry." What's the relationship there? How does that work?
Yeah, I think we talked about this yesterday, but obviously my answer was full echo. So basically what I was saying
several times, right?
Was that, once you have asked for forgiveness, once you've said sorry and you've asked for forgiveness from God, from that person, and you've changed the behavior or whatever the situation is, if they choose not to forgive you or not to let you off the hook or badmouth you, there's nothing that you can do about that. You can't change people's behavior. You can only change your own.
Yeah.
So what I was sort of saying was just that, if you've done the right thing, you have to just leave it there, and then hope that person will come to their own peace with it. And if the problem that Matt said was that people kind of spreading rumors or that kind of thing, then you just have to kind of take it to God and sort of know that the people that know you won't believe those things, or you'll be able to explain it to them. It's a difficult one, but once you've done the right thing, I think you just have to sort of leave it there.
Yeah, I think the temptation would be to just to retaliate. And actually, if you are seeking forgiveness, retaliation, it's not the best response. I was reading a really interesting article in the news this morning about how, it was in Bloomberg, I think, talking about how Boris Johnson, who, let's just say, has not had a brilliant track record with dealing with the pandemic, but how, I think the headline was, he's played an absolute blinder with the EU over recent weeks, because there's been a bit of a spat, hasn't there, with the EU threatening to cancel exports so they can keep the COVID vaccine, which would have had a direct impact on Britain, and how ordinarily Boris would be in there with his sword, a bit like Peter chopping the ear off this guy, but actually on this occasion, his diplomacy and non-retaliation seems to have worked in England's favour, and how people are now applauding that and going, that's been very clever, because the net result is great. And this this idea of when things are going wrong, it's easy to retaliate, but forgiveness often means the opposite of retaliation.
Yeah. No, you're right, it does. Our instant reaction is want to kick back, isn't it? If you are quite a feisty person as well, then, you know, that might be how you want to react. But that's going to give you pleasure for a few seconds, and then you're just going to feel worse than you did before. So, yeah, I think we're not perfect. We're never always going to react in the same way, but we can bear these things in mind, and we can think about them the next time, you know, the next time something happens, the next time we respond to something, maybe we would do it differently.
Yeah.
But there's grace. I think the main message is there's grace for us all, and we can go to God with these things.
That's a brilliant way to put it. So I guess, well, one, thank you for having this conversation on a Monday morning. Fortunately, it's the Easter week, so you know you've got a bit of a break.
Holidays, yeah.
Apparently, you're saying that. Well, just tell everybody where you're going in a few minutes' time.
Yeah, it is the Easter holidays, but I'm just about to go into school because I need to sort some things out. I need to sort some things out in my classroom, and I don't get a chance when all the kids are in there. So yeah. I'm spending my first day of the Easter holidays at school.
In school. Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you for being an awesome teacher and teaching our kids, but and going in on your day off. I mean, that's you know, that's the kind of stuff that that dedicated people do. So well done.
Can I just quickly tell you this little story then before we finish? A little girl in my class. So I teach year 2 this at the moment, so they're 6 and 7 years old. Little girl in my class put her hand up. Yes, miss. Yeah. It's so easy being a teacher, isn't it? All you have to do is just tell children what to do. And I sort of stood at the front of the class like, take a deep breath. Take a deep breath. I was just like,
so how did you respond to that?
I sort of said very calmly, well, do you know what time I get to school? At 7:30. Do you know what time I leave school? About 6 o'clock. Does that sound easy? No, me. I think she knew straight away that it wasn't a very popular comment, but it did make me laugh. It was funny.
Well, you know, we do the kids say the funniest thing on a fairly regular basis because they do say the funniest things.
Absolutely.
And that just that's brilliant. Well, that's a great way to end. Any closing thoughts, Mrs. Birch?
No, yes, then just to say no and then say something. The answer is yes. No, just to say, you know, if you're struggling with this, if you need help because you've been betrayed or you're in that place of shame, then seek out somebody that you can talk to, somebody that you trust, and ask them to help you. Or if you haven't got anybody like that you can speak to about these things, then you can get in touch with us. There's a WhatsApp number, there's our website, and you can get in touch with us, and we would love to pray for you or help you in any way we can. So just don't kind of be alone in it, is what I would say.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sal. Appreciate it. Enjoy your afternoon in school, and thank you everybody for watching this video. We will be back on Sunday with our Easter service, so make sure you come along, invite your friends. Really looking forward to Easter. It's my favorite day of the year, so do come along and join us as we've got a really great celebration going on. But enjoy the rest of your week. We will see you Sunday. Bye for now.
Have a great week, everyone.